second edition of the Board of County Commissioners regular commission meeting. You're late. We're waiting for you. Welcome to Harris Hall, everyone, and for those of you all online. Our presentation with the City of Eugene today feels like old home week for me. Ms. Mokarajski, we're on item 11A, which is a report in the matter of presenting information on the City of Eugene's Downtown Urban Renewal Plan Amendment. And I'll ask you to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Chair, and we're pleased to have our friends from the City of Eugene here that I'll let Jude introduce. I first want to introduce you. This is the first opportunity for us to introduce you to Jude Anderson, who's our new Community and Economic Development Manager here with Lane County in week week four. So we're really excited to have Jude. You'll get to know Jude well in future presentations and work that we do together, but happy to welcome you here for the first time in Harris Hall, and please introduce the item and our guest today.
And if I may say, Jude, very quick assimilation of the letter O, I see. Bravo.
I just got it yesterday.
Nice, yeah.
I figured it was apropos. So yes, go Ducks.
Well,
That's a way to win fans and influence.
actually, that's this,
apparently.
not this, right? That's hang loose.
Exactly. I'm like, I can't really tout the hook 'em horns anymore. But no, very happy to be here, and it's still really good football. So yes, Jude Anderson, new manager for Community and Economic Development. Very honored to be here before you today. My apologies on navigating the system. I was thinking I'm back in Texas and I need to check a gun or something like that. But no, I really was excited to have this opportunity early in my tenure here to be able to support the City of Eugene in discussing their urban renewal district. One of the roles that I had just prior to leaving the work I was doing in the City of Houston for a consulting firm was the contract administrator for a very similar district, a tax increment refinancing zone in East Downtown, which is a very similar mission and values there. It was an appointed board position that also managed the debt for one of our sports facilities, our soccer stadium back home, and that was a really important portion of our budget. So I know that, you know, the financial side of these is really of primary importance, and how these investments are made to promote place-based economic development. So I was excited to see, you know, and hear and learn about the zone and have a conversation with Amanda. So I'm going to hand it over now to Ann Fifield here, who's joined us from City of Eugene, and just to let you all know more about their amendment.
And I will actually hand it to Amanda D'Souza, who will kick us off.
Manager in the city's Community Development Division. I'm here with Ann Fifield, as well as other colleagues, to talk to you about a proposed amendment to our Downtown Urban Renewal Plan. So this process actually started in June of 2022, when City Council, acting as the Urban Renewal Agency Board, was considering the future of the Downtown Urban Renewal District. At the time, there wasn't a clear path forward for the program, so they directed us to come back with more information on downtown priorities and projects that could possibly inform an amendment. In response to that, we launched the Downtown Priorities and Projects efforts last fall. Through this process, we talked to a number of community members through interviews, focus groups, and an open house. We were able to engage with over 2,000 community members, being sure to talk with residents, employees, businesses, social service providers, and other stakeholders with an interest in downtown. Through that outreach process, there were 6 categories that emerged: housing, public safety, social services, commercial activity and development, public space and mobility, and events and culture. Each of these categories has its own set of priorities and projects. Through our discussion, those top 3 categories, housing, public safety, and social services, quickly rose to the top as being the highest priority. The city's working to address all 6 categories, but is currently focusing our short-term efforts on these top 3. Urban renewal is one of the tools we have to address some of these projects. Before I get into the proposed amendment, though, I'll pass it to Ann, who'll give an overview of what urban renewal is.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm Ann Fifield. I'm the Economic Development Manager over at the City of Eugene. And so we're here today to talk about amending the Downtown Urban Renewal Plan, which will use urban renewal to address those priorities that Amanda had on the list before. For those of you who are relatively new, urban renewal is a tool that focuses property tax revenue into a specific geography, an urban renewal district. This map on the screen shows where the downtown urban renewal district goes. It goes west, starts west on the west side from about Lincoln Street, north to 6th, south down to 11th, and then east to Pearl with a little arm going out to High and 8th Avenue. In an urban renewal district, the district collects what is known as tax increment. Urban renewal is also known as tax increment financing. Urban renewal uses tax increment to fund specific capital projects in an urban renewal district. I'll use this chart to explain. The vertical axis shows property tax revenue, and the horizontal axis shows time. The first thing you do in an urban renewal district after you've defined that boundary is you determine the assessed taxable value. This is the frozen base. It's the taxable assessed value in year one, and revenue from that value goes to all the overlapping taxing districts, which includes Lane County, but also the City of Eugene and School District 4J. This frozen base does not change over time, it is frozen. That revenue from the frozen base goes to the overlapping taxing districts throughout the life of the district. But over time, the taxable assessed value grows. That revenue from the incremental taxable value goes to the urban renewal district. That's why it's called tax increment. The tax revenue from the increment is the tool to fund capital projects in the district. It's a useful tool to fund improvements to buildings and infrastructure. It cannot fund operations like police officers, and it cannot fund projects outside the district. It can be used to fund projects that are identified in the urban renewal plan, which Amanda will discuss in detail. The plan spells out what the increment can be spent on and how much can be spent. An urban renewal plan has to identify a total spending limit, which is called maximum indebtedness. Even though it uses the term indebtedness, it does not require that the district have a debt limit. It's just a spending limit. Urban renewal has a lot of language that's very specific to urban renewal. The district can either borrow, it can issue debt, or it can use a pay-as-you-go method. But it can only spend up to that maximum indebtedness limit, which is a terrible word. And once it's spent up to that limit and paid off any associated debt, the district expires. When the district expires, the incremental taxable value goes back to the overlapping taxing districts. We're here this afternoon to discuss amending the current urban renewal plan, which would increase the maximum indebtedness limit, so extend the life of the plan. I'm going to hand it back to Amanda, and she'll discuss the proposed amendment for the downtown district.
Thanks.
Before
Ann.
you proceed, Ms. D'Souza, pardon me, quick question. Something I didn't know. I've been, with the city council for 10 years, and I did not know that Bethel School District was not included in that.
That is because the Bethel School District does not include downtown Eugene. It doesn't include the geography of the downtown district.
Just the specific, any district that overlaps with the district, not with the entire.
Physical overlapping district. And so another district is the Willamette Soil and Water District, LCC, and Lane ESD.
Perfect.
But they're very small.
Thanks.
So I'll give a quick big picture overview of the district. The current spending limit is $66 million. It was last increased in 2016, which added $19.4 million. The Downtown Urban Renewal Plan was last amended in 2016 when eligible activities were limited to 4 specific projects, each with their own spending cap, and in 2020 when the farmers market spending cap was removed. As Ann mentioned, the district expires when the spending limit is met, which is forecast to happen this December, which brings us to the proposed amendment. Last month, the agency board voted to formally initiate a plan amendment process. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear me say both council and the agency board. They're technically separate bodies, though in Eugene, council acts as the agency board. That's not always the case in other jurisdictions, like you've probably seen with the Springfield Economic Development Association. So when council initiated the amendment, they started a process outlined in the state statutes that require we present to you, the county, among other steps. I'll touch on those steps later. To identify the projects that could be included in the proposed amendment, we looked to the downtown priorities and projects efforts. Based on what we heard, the amendment includes 3 proposed project-focused buckets: housing, physical improvements to address safety and comfort, and emerging projects which would be initiated by the agency board. I'll talk through these in a little bit more detail. So during the public outreach last fall, housing emerged as one of the most important priorities in downtown. We heard it was important the cities support the creation of a mix of new housing affordable across income levels. To help address this, this bucket includes 2 new possible projects to support the creation of housing. The first is development fee assistance, which would pay for government-imposed development fees for new housing, such as system development charges and permit fees. And this could apply to new construction or redevelopment of existing buildings, like conversion of office into residential spaces. The second is real property acquisition, which allows the agency board to acquire property and offer it for reduced or no cost for new housing development. Both of these efforts help to offset construction costs to make housing projects financially feasible. Should the plan be approved later this year, both projects would require agency board direction and decisions before they could be implemented. For development fee assistance, staff would work with the agency board to establish the program, including any eligibility criteria, and then agency board action would be required before acquiring or offering real property for housing. The next bucket is physical improvements to address safety and comfort. This allows the agency to make physical improvements to right-of-way in the plan area to create safe, accessible, and welcoming spaces for users. Improvements can include street, curb, alley, and sidewalk improvements, streetscape projects, or pedestrian, bike, and transit improvements. Some of the projects that we see could address safety and comfort include lighting in alleys, fixing pavements and sidewalks, and adding planting and landscaping throughout the plan area. If the proposed plan amendment is approved, projects in this bucket would be implemented on an as-needed basis. Agency board approval would be needed for any projects over $250,000. The third focus area bucket is referred to as emerging projects, which would be directed or initiated by the agency board. These can be considered projects that align with downtown priorities and that the agency board could pursue in the medium to long term, in contrast to housing and physical improvements, which we expect will begin being implemented in the nearer term. This bucket could include supporting the development of community facilities, such as convention center improvements or expansion. The agency board could also choose to pursue revitalization of open spaces, including implementation of projects that were identified in the 2016 Project for Public Spaces report, which included things like big redevelopment of the park blocks. And finally, the agency board could provide financial assistance to support the revitalization of vacant storefronts and underutilized properties. Agency board direction would be needed for any of these 3 projects to move forward. Next, I'll touch on the proposed increase to the spending limit, also known as maximum indebtedness. We presented 3 scenarios to the agency board, and they chose to move forward with the highest one, which would increase the spending limit by $50 million. Based on current estimates, we forecast a $50 million increase would extend the district by 19 years. And then state statutes require us to estimate how much urban renewal projects will cost. These are the estimated allocations that we presented to the agency board. The estimates are estimates only. They provide guideposts to staff and generally articulate council priorities, and the actual amounts will be determined as the agency board makes decisions on plan implementation. We did hear very clearly from the agency board that their priority is going to be supporting the new creation of housing, and that's where they intend to spend most of the dollars. I'll touch on what the fiscal implications are, whether or not the plan is amended. If the plan's amended and the district is extended, based on fiscal year 22 data, approximately $2.6 million in tax increment revenue will continue to be collected every year and be spent on eligible projects. If the plan is ultimately not amended and the agency discontinues the collection of tax increment, the funds would be directed to overlapping taxing districts. Based on fiscal year 22 data, under this scenario, the city general fund would receive about $1.3 million, and the county would receive about $235,000. Approximately $880,000 would be collected on behalf of School District 4J, but due to a property tax compression and state funding mechanisms, 4J would see a net decrease of $150,000 to their budget should tax increments stop being collected. I'll end on next steps for the amendment. So state statutes require that we reach out to overlapping taxing districts and the Planning Commission about the proposed amendment, which is why we're here today. We also sent a mailer notifying the public about the proposed amendment, and we'll have a public hearing on May 15th. Council is scheduled to review any comments on the amendment at their June 12th work session and take action on June 21st. With that, we'll hand it back to you and are happy to answer any questions you all may have. Thank you.
Well, for me personally, this is pretty exciting. I mean, we've witnessed the positive things that urban renewal has done right outside of our window, and it goes beyond our window. You know, we have a beautiful downtown library thanks to urban renewal, the LCC improvements thanks to urban renewal, and not to mention the other district, which is the Riverfront Research Park, which has been a tremendous economic boost for the community. Bravo. I'm going to turn it over to the commissioners for questions. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I have a particular question on the dollar increase and the years associated with it. So it sounds like the priority will be for housing projects close to the downtown area. And it's proposed that the $50 million increase will be for approximately 19 years. Although when it comes to housing and costs recently, as they go up, for actually building facilities, I'm not sure it's going to really last a full 19 years. So I was curious what your formula for evaluating how many years that 50 million will last.
I might need Mauricio on this. The $50 million is the amount we would increase the maximum indebtedness. We estimate it will take that long to collect tax revenue to cover that $50 million. Then we spend the $50 million on housing and emerging projects and infrastructure improvements. We've estimated, based on current information, it'll take about 19 years to generate the revenue to pay off that maximum indebtedness.
Understood. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification, because if it was 50 million to spend, we could probably do that pretty quick when it comes to
Yes.
We could do that next week.
yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further questions? Commissioner Seneca.
In that map, where's the housing gonna go?
Do you want to bring it back to the map?
Yep.
I was kind of looking through it mentally, trying to think of where we're gonna fit the housing.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so we as staff have started going through this exercise of identifying sites. I mean, there's a number of parking lots out there. And so, we have the lot north of the Farmers Market Pavilion that is shovel ready. We've had very preliminary conversations with county staff about the McHale's property, which was a former dry cleaner that the county currently owns through foreclosure. There's potential there. There's parking lots like next to US Bank. So there's lots of parking lots, I think, ripe for potential. There are other properties that are being underutilized. Next to us in the atrium, there's a former weed shop that is currently vacant and covered in graffiti. There's potential there. There's a lot of vacant office space, but as we saw in the pandemic, there's less demand for office space, so there's potential there to possibly convert. So there's a lot of potential and a lot of parking lots at the moment. So yeah, we think there's lots of opportunity.
We've started to reach out to property owners. We've had some conversations about converting. If you have underutilized, there's a lot of smaller buildings that they have second floors that aren't being used for much, and could that get converted to housing? We're sort of in preliminary conversations, and we'll find out if that works. It may be technically really challenging, it may be financially really challenging, and so we'll set up a pilot. We're planning to set up a pilot program to see if what we can incentivize will actually produce housing out of those older buildings. Some buildings we may want to tear down and build new housing. Sort of, it's the majority of the property is owned by the private sector, so we'll have to work with private parties to make it move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Along those lines, maybe this is outside the scope of this presentation, but is there an update or is there already urban renewal dollars going into, is it 1059 Willamette, the former LCC building? Because as I recall, that's
Yeah.
been slated to become housing for a
Yes.
few years now.
Yeah, that's still the plan. So, let's see, we're actually going to council in a couple weeks to update the deal points to update the timeline in it. So the development team is still on board to turn that into a mixed income housing. So it's 129 units, half of which would be affordable to households earning 80% AMI or less. There is $700,000 of urban renewal earmarked to support that project. And so we're hoping to sign a development agreement with the team in the next month, which I think will be a pretty big milestone for the project, and that's moving forward. This period has taken longer than anticipated. Rising interest rates and construction costs meant they had to kind of relook at their financing package, but we're all very close to being ready to take the next step.
Great. And still the 10 units set aside to work with Hope and Safety
Still,
Alliance?
yep,
Great.
still there. Mhm.
Thank you. And then my only other question at this moment, just to clarify, I think you said, is the Eugene City Council, is the totality of the agency board is the Eugene City Council?
Yep.
There's not additional members?
Right, yep. just-
Great. Thank you.
Further questions? Commissioner Lovall.
Yeah, thank you. This is exciting. I love hearing people living in downtown cores. We've seen that in Springfield. It's been very successful to changing communities. So good on you for doing that. Question follow-up to the Vice Chair's question about the current LCC building. You said 100 and how many units was going there?
129.
129 units. Guessing they're probably about 500 to 600 square feet a unit, give or take $400 a square foot. That's about a $30 million project, if I got my math right.
Yeah, I think the last quote, from last year, was 35 million, and so there's complicated demo, so.
Right. So I'm just wondering, so this urban renewal increase and the debt, let me help figure this out. So could a developer go in there and ask a partnership development loan, gap fill loan or something like from the urban renewal people or the city of Eugene to help fund that? Because we have a project brewing in Springfield that's an 8-story, 81-unit complex next to the post office that had about a $2 million gap, but then after you get the second bid, now they got about a $12 million gap.
Yeah.
So those growing costs are, they're considerable and rapid. So I'm wondering how we're going to keep up with that.
Yeah, so we have a couple different, I think, pieces. So there's the development fee assistance, so that would take a good chunk out of the cost. We right now estimate, based on recently completed projects, SDCs and permits come to about $10,000 per unit built, so we would be able to cover that. We also have the multi-unit property tax exemption program, so package that. We are also exploring a lighter version of the MUPD for a 5-year exemption with less barriers. Our MUPD program is quite complex and is right now kind of resulting only in very large-scale apartments, and so can the program be adapted for smaller parties to use it? And then the way that there's a chance that all of that is still not enough to make something pencil, and so through that emerging projects bucket, there's a door open for council or the agency board to be able to make more funds available to support projects. So there's a door there. And then we also have our downtown loan program, which is part of urban renewal, and that can be used to offer gap financing assistance as well. So we're hoping piecing together all these pieces will hopefully be enough to make housing come up, because it's not occurring naturally, as we can see.
And for those that didn't follow that dialogue, as you and I talk like locomotive freight trains.
Yeah, yeah.
The MUPT is the multi-unit property tax exemption program.
Correct.
The other thing I was thinking too, just recently I heard that maybe be coming back into the financial market is what was called an insurance gap for financing, to where if a developer came in and they needed $15 million for something to build, but it yet quite didn't pencil the way it appraised out with the bank, and it came in at like $10 million they could get for loans, it'd be a $5 million gap. And there would be an insurance policy that the bank could buy, that they could then bridge that gap by the bank financing that $5 million, and the bank wouldn't be quote unquote on the hook for it, but it would be an independent insurance. So have you heard any programs like that coming back into play like they did back in early 2000?
I've never heard of that.
No, I wrote that down, and we'll do some research on that. The other thing that we do have downtown is we're a federal opportunity zone.
Yes.
Which gives a tax advantage on the income tax side using the federal tax code. To my knowledge, it has not been used in the downtown. We know that the opportunity zone incentive is being used on the riverfront. One of the, I think the downside of the opportunity zone program is there's no public reporting. We only know because we're nosy. There's no reporting to the local government if they're using it, but we know it is being used. And so it's a complex program. It would take a relatively sophisticated developer to actually to use that incentive, and so it would undoubtedly be a much larger project.
Okay, I got a couple more questions. You got a few more minutes? The second thing is the parks SDCs. I know in Springfield, we're really challenged with Willamette Lane being pretty heavy-handed on parks SDCs. They have 2 tiers where they have an ADU tier based on square footage and then a full home based on square footage. Is Eugene up against that sort of SDC costs?
We've adjusted the Parks SDC to lower the cost for smaller units.
Good.
And so like a studio is paying a smaller SDC than a larger apartment. And I know we've adjusted it for ADUs as well, but that's what the development fee incentive using urban renewal would cover the SDC cost.
So the urban renewal covers that gap. The Parks Department doesn't come in and say, oh, we'll only accept half off.
Correct, yeah,
Yeah.
so the money is still going, Parks is still getting the money, which is great, and it's the urban renewal agency that's paying for it.
I was going to suggest maybe we take Parks Department to lunch and have a little negotiation. I guess that's another question.
We did that a few years ago, actually, quite literally. And so our transportation and our parks SDCs have been adjusted to lower their cost in the city center, just because the imposition on the transportation system for something in the city center, folks aren't driving as much as they are on the edge. And so it's been explicitly reduced in the downtown and on transportation corridors. And then the Parks SDC had a somewhat comparable adjustment to acknowledge that smaller units impose a smaller cost to the system.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, right. The other thing we're going to have some pushback on is we start infilling parking lots with buildings. We're going to have the parking people screaming and yelling at us too. Is there any thought to integrating parking with those buildings that we're taking and putting on parking lots?
I mean, I know that there are no parking minimum requirements in the city center currently, especially with the climate-friendly equitable communities, which is further removing minimums. I think we would welcome projects incorporating parking. I know a lot of lenders would want to see parking for those projects to be able to pencil, especially if they're taking out a parking lot.
At this point, we don't have any explicit plans, but that is one way the Broadway Place apartment complex came out of the ground, is that the city owns the parking on the bottom and a private party owns the parking on the top. And that was by bringing those together, it was what was a whole complicated package to make it feasible.
Right, 2 more questions. The public safety question about that. We talk about making the neighborhoods more safe. Obviously, if we can redevelop neighborhoods where people are living in them, then the presence of people develop certain services. Those services have a certain clientele. And of course, as you know, we have some issues with our downtown with what's going on with public safety. So is there, in that budgeting, a thought to an improved or more robust security force or anything like that? What's the talk on that?
So downtown, urban renewal can't be used for operational things like that. Outside of urban renewal, the city is looking at changing the structure of addressing needs in downtown, and so they're looking at an incident commander system that would be able to respond quickly to health and safety needs. And then in addition to that, we're also exploring, and I know probably should know more, but I know minimal about it. We're exploring a behavioral health specialist dedicated to downtown, and I believe the city is in conversations with the county public health about what that position could look like and how it would operate. So there are efforts going on outside of the urban renewal discussions to address those other issues, because we know that that's the immediate short term.
Right. You just, sorry, now I have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
With part of that development, is there any thought to where we were going to have some centralized or localized public restroom space that some of the people who are transitioning in and out of the area can have some access to? I know that's kind of problematic as such, but I know there's other cities that have attacked that and they've done pretty well with it, monitoring. Is there anything thinking going on with that?
I'm not sure the current status. I know there has been talk about adding another, like Portland Loo. I don't know where that conversation is at the moment. Urban Renewal would certainly be eligible to pay for it. Off the top of my head, I don't know more, and we could come back with more or we could get more information to you about the current.
My understanding is the conversation about an additional Portland Loo is evolving, given that the existing Portland Loo does not everyone chooses to use it.
Right. There's challenges, yeah. All right, last question. is there some sort of design standard? What I mean by that is, it's not really an HOA kind of approach, but in a way it kind of is, about what businesses are going to be okay and appropriately zoned in the area. I know that in downtown Springfield with the emerging vision that's been going on there's certain businesses that, although they're welcome elsewhere, they're not necessarily welcome in the downtown core, i.e., automotive repair stations, some churches, those kinds of larger retail spaces like Walmart or Walmart markets or those sort of things. Have we given any thought to what the urban renewal district looks like from an HOA kind of perspective?
Not from an HOA perspective. I mean, I know there's businesses that I think we would like to be able to proactively reach out to. We always hear like there's a need for a pharmacy in downtown Eugene. So is there a way we could proactively get that kind of service if the market's going to bring a type of business? I'm not sure there's much we can do to prevent it from happening, but we can try to be proactive. In terms of actual project design, that's always a conversation at the city. We have an urban designer on staff, and so we do try to account for that. Like, for example, our MUPD program includes a project design element where they're required to build what they say they're going to build. And so we would be looking, if we're going to be offering any public subsidy or assistance, we would be looking for things like that, like will you deliver on what you're showing to us?
Right, I would agree with that, but I'd also encourage you to think about just the overall vision of what it looks like when we're done in 15 or 19.
Yeah, we're always trying to toy that line of like, how do we look out for the public good, but also we want housing. So there's always that balance.
And for the great majority of the district is zone C3, and that is what limits, and the uses are basically just aligned with what's allowed in C3.
You can always change those.
And actually, I do think in the way that the MUPD program was revised a few years ago, and one of the key parts of it is this design review. You not only have to build what you said you were going to build, you have to get your design approved by our urban designer. And I think that we don't have design review in Eugene, but if we are providing financial incentives to encourage housing, that is a way for us to impose design review. There's a string attached to those financial incentives. We absolutely want things to look right.
Financial incentives that aren't 7, 8, 9%, is there any way we can help people do that at a lower cost somehow? I don't know, I'm just throwing that out. I mean, that's really what's driving the cost of, or the speed of economic development is the cost of money right now. It's 7.5% if you're going to develop one of these projects, which makes what you said, Amanda, pencil out doesn't make it pencil out, unless you're going 9 floors, and then it's a huge project.
We have very limited influence over the Federal Reserve.
Well, I mean, if the county or the Eugene has something they can leverage, that it's a shorter payback with a refinancing incentive or something like that, is what I'm thinking. I mean, like a lead-in loan kind of.
Mostly what we're able to do is with the development incentives, is lower their costs. And then with the loan program, our loan program is all of the terms are set by our team, and we typically offer things at 5%.
Good.
And so we actually have not been very attractive for quite some time, but we're getting a lot of phone calls lately. And but it's limited. We have, I think, $4 million available to lend in the downtown district, so it's limited on what it can do.
It's amazing how 5% looks when you're at 7 versus when you're at 3. Yeah, right. Good job, you guys. Nice work.
Excellent. Well, I'm hardly able to contain myself, but I have to for a moment longer. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question occurred to me. Can you share a little bit about the history of and the determination to arrive at this particular boundary for the district?
It was way before our time.
The initial, I believe everything except the funny little arm to the east is the initial district boundary, if I've got it right. And it was, I don't know how they came up with it initially. I've recently been through a bunch of old plans, and why they came up with that boundary, I'm not sure. But the funny little arm was established in 2016, where we were planning to build the farmer's market over on what is now your lot on that coverage, but City Council very explicitly wanted to show that no urban renewal dollars would be spent on a city hall. And in 2016, City Hall was planned to go in the space just west of the arm. And so, but we wanted to make it eligible for the farmer's market. And so we have a funny little peninsula.
So what I'm hearing too is it can be changed and moved in response to a potential kind of development or to, excuse me, prevent a particular kind of use.
Yes.
And is that decision made also by the agency board exclusively?
Yes.
You want to,
Yeah, so we are on a tight timeline, given that the district is possibly going to cease to exist in December. And so we have been talking about boundary expansion. Council has had some preliminary discussions, and we've recommended, let's get through this amendment process and explore all the potential boundary expansion areas. I think on all sides, there's argument for why it should be expanded. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're back at this body in a year looking to do some expansion strategically to bring in some other elements that need some attention as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Then Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. Sorry to pause. Just bouncing off that, it occurs to me that that little arm is basically the county's parking lot. And so it doesn't make any sense anymore from your district perspective. So
Correct.
I do look forward to whatever the update on the boundaries will be. I think that will be a big upgrade in your overall renewal development.
there's a limit as to how many acres we can add?
Yeah, so you can only expand your district 20% from what you started with. So right now, we can only expand by 9 more acres. And it's also funny, like, even if we took out that arm, it's already counted, so we don't get to use that acreage elsewhere.
Yeah.
But we can now, so we can expand by 9 acres, which is a decent amount, but not a ton. So that's why we want to be strategic about where we are expanding.
And we can make road improvements along that arm to enhance the pedestrian experience, which I think would be, it won't be enough to do anything on the parcel itself, but I think that a big part of what we're looking at is making it a more pleasant area for the pedestrian experience. Especially, I think what's important over there is there's a lot of new positive energy in the Fifth Street Public Market area, and we want those folks who are over there to spill across 6th and 7th and come to this side of those roads. And part of that is making it visually very appealing. And so what we do in the public realm, I think, will be very important over the next few years.
Thanks, Commissioner. And yeah, I didn't know you couldn't delete an ad. That's
Yeah.
There's lots of weird rules with urban renewal.
Yeah, and you know, I first got involved in 1995, and that was when Ruth Bascom was the mayor. And Ruth had this amazing vision of what was going to happen basically down that arm and to the river. And that, by and large, the city of Eugene's followed through on much of that. And it really is, it's just delightful, the work that's happened and the things that we're seeing in the downtown core, in no small part because of urban renewal, because of the positive things that it's done for the downtown area. And I am excited, I mean, really very excited about the prospects of a $50 million ceiling and how much that can leverage in development throughout this entire district. My question, you know, it runs along West 11th right now, which is directly across from the old library. And we now call the old library Homes for Good. And Homes for Good has a large parking lot, which ultimately is going to be developed into housing. So that leads to a couple of questions. So I'm presuming that public housing can be a part of urban renewal. So our housing authority, which is Homes for Good, is eligible for use of urban renewal funds to defray its debt. And so once again, that parking lot, there's now a surface parking lot, the Homes for Good, is prime for housing development, very efficient public housing development. So I'm sure that's going to be a part of the discussion as we go down the road. So many things to talk about, but we've got, 19 years to do it? So
Yeah.
and I'll be there the whole time. You can count on that. This really is very, very exciting. And Jude, I'm excited to talk to you about how urban renewal differs here from Houston. Because Houston, through the years, has done some pretty amazing things, which you have with development and urban renewal, I would guess. So, but once again, I'm back to Eugene. I'm really excited. I'm fully in favor of this. You don't need any action from us today. This is just a discussion.
Don't need action. In 2016, the board wrote a letter of support, but no action is required.
All right. Well, anything further on your presentation? Then nothing further for this, other than I'm going to say this, Ms. Souza, it's been a pleasure working with you through the years on a lot of different projects, all of which have fruitful net for the entire area. And keep up the good work. May I ask, who is your boss? Who do you report to? She is really good.
Don't I know
I told
it?
you that. Right on. Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation, and we look forward to working with you and observing from this observation point.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Commissioners.
I do. All right, give it a moment to clear the room, Mr. Mokrajewski, and we will move back into your truncated announcements.
I don't have anything else.
So the
Yeah, Again,
truncated-
we'll have more tonight at 5:30 during the budget presentation.
Very good. Then Commissioners' business, do we have any announcements from the Board of Commissioners? We're going to get through this afternoon fairly quickly. Then I have just a couple of very, very quick things that other commissioners have been working on, but I'll point it out in public. And some changes are happening in our Human Services Commission / Poverty and Homelessness Board. And as you all know, we've had a consulting agency working with the staff and the leadership of those two commissions to see what is the future of Human Services Commission and Poverty and Homelessness Board. Now, without going into details right now, that is moving forward apace, and Commissioner Trigger and I were involved in a fairly, I thought it was a pretty productive meeting this last.
Yesterday.
Was that yesterday?
Yesterday.
Seems like a week ago. So,
It's been a long week today.
Is it Friday already? So we're and so with that, there'll be changes to come down the road in terms of how perhaps the governance model of that takes place, and also how the work plan and work process takes place. Vice Chair, excuse me, Commissioner Buck.
If you had something else, I'll stay in the queue.
No, the other thing is that tomorrow, this is one that Commissioner Buck has been pretty involved with. The multi-agency collaborative will be meeting again tomorrow to move forward on the governor's 2302 homeless emergency declaration. And we'll be hearing more next week on the City of Eugene's tag-along potential emergency declaration that'll be occurring at next week's, we think it probably will occur at next week's board meeting. So all that is moving forward in a very fast order, because those things, the timelines are by nature very, very short, and by prescription very, very short. So we'll hear more of that as we go along with that. That is all I have then, Commissioner Buck.
I wanted to add to your first point regarding the PHB and the Human Services Commission. I'm on the Housing Policy Board, who is also going through a transition to determine what their direction should be going forward. I kind of wish it had been wrapped up with your consultant on your two boards, although housing policy is a separate subject. For those that haven't been involved in the Housing Policy Board, it was multi-jurisdictional with the City of Springfield, City of Eugene, and Lane County. City of Springfield dropped off a long time ago, and there were changes in its allocation of funding, and now it doesn't allocate any funding anymore. So it's been highly focused on City of Eugene activity for several years. I'm brand new to this particular committee, and I know, Commissioner Farr, you've been on it for a long time, and so tell me if I have any history wrong here, but we will be discussing at our next meeting what the direction of that particular board will and/or should be. I'm advocating that, should it remain in its consistent form, that it really should involve a more regional approach for all of our cities regarding housing policy. But that's really for the committee to decide. And so we don't have the opportunity to work right now with a consultant on that visualization. But I might recommend that in the future. So I wanted everybody to be aware of the status of that particular committee.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Buck. And I was first involved in 1995. It goes back a long way. In 1995, the Housing Policy Board both had teeth and substance. Much of that evaporated through the years, which caused the City of Springfield to back away from it. And Lane County's involvement has been marginal or minimal. Commissioner Sorensen was the representative there for quite some time, and I was the alternate. And our participation in Housing Policy Board was sparse at best. I served once again as the alternate, and I sat at the table quite often. But it really has had its place, and in the future potentially could, but not in its current form. They do good work. There's no question about it. They talk a lot about rental, not rental control, but the rental situation. But I believe that there is a different future for it. But that'll be a matter for that board to discuss. So, very good. Then back to the Human Services Commission and the Poverty and Homelessness Board. The difference between the two, very briefly, is that the Human Services Commission is intergovernmental. That is funded by and participated in by 3 jurisdictions, City of Eugene, Lane County, and Springfield. The Poverty and Homelessness Board is a Lane County board only. It is intergovernmental, that is to say, it's multi-jurisdictional, so different jurisdictions do participate in it. So the best parts about, in my mind, the best parts about Poverty and Homelessness Board is the breadth of the membership, which included tripartite membership, which is required by the CA, the statutory bodies that we have, the Community Action Agency and the Continuum of Care, required to be attended by lived experience, by intergovernmental, and by practitioners. And the Poverty and Homelessness Board is such, that the Human Services Commission is not. So there'll be some kind of a discussion as to how that merger occurs so that the CFC and CAA will continue to operate as required by federal standards. So a lot to say about that, and I probably muddied the water more than cleared it with that, but the discussion there is underway. Then moving directly along, do we have any future board assignment requests? I'm seeing here none, Ms. Mokrahysky. So can you review all those assignments you just heard?
I don't have any from today.
Very good. Then with that,
We have a busy few weeks.
we have no need for executive session today. We do have a busy week of budget committee meetings commencing at, at 1:30 this afternoon. At 5:30 today. So very good. And with that, Ms. Mokrahysky, we are adjourned for the afternoon.